Hello, everyone. This is how to give feedback at the writer's block. If you've been a member of the writer's block for any length of time, you'll know that one of the most crucial aspects of our server is making sure that everybody has an equal and fair opportunity to receive a review from others, because otherwise it's just not fair. So, really, if you haven't given feedback before, you might be thinking, why is feedback so important? And actually, it benefits you as well, because what you are doing is you're seeing maybe stuff that you can improve on as well, and you're seeing things that you maybe haven't thought about before. So, feedback is part of both a reader and a writer's life. It's beneficial for both of you, and it's crucial to the development of writing. And even the most professional writers will have to go through this at some point. So they might be having feedback from editors, they might be having feedback from agents, for example, and they would have been going through this for years by now. If they are New York Times bestsellers, then that is exactly their job, basically. So don't ever think, feedback is someone telling me I'm bad, because that's not the case. Of course, when unpublished or just starting out, or any case like that, though, the reader feedback is also really crucial, because it alerts you to a couple of different things, and we're going to go through this now. So, feedback, as I'm sure you know, is not just a negative thing. It will never be just a negative thing. All over the server, I'm always seeing, I like this about your work, I like that about your work, and that is fantastic. And what we have here is people giving a bit of a boost in confidence, and this is amazing. Maybe your plot is a fantastic concept, but maybe as well, moving on to that second point, maybe there is something that you haven't thought about, and it might improve it just that little bit, might make it a little bit less confusing for a reader who hasn't created it, because it's easy to miss things when you've created the world or the setting and stuff like that. So the important thing to remember is people aren't trying to tear you down when they say things that can be improved. If they're not just boosting your confidence, in a way that is a good thing, because it means that they think you have the potential to be even more successful in what you're doing. And of course, the third one, whether your style and tone is consistent. So this is something that I feel like gets missed out a lot. And that is because usually people are thinking grammar and on the sort of focus level, line by line level. But otherwise, style and tone is a bit broader than that, but it's also less broad than the concept of plot. So we'll probably be going into other videos about this. I know we have something about tone that we did a couple of months ago. And style is definitely something we'll also be doing. Grammar is also coming up. But yes, if it's technically not grammatically accurate, is it for effect? Because that can be a stylistic choice. Again, going back into style, but this is just me yapping at this point, so I'm going to move on. Ultimately, reader perspectives, anything you like, anything you don't like, and maybe does the flow work, and really anything that is your opinion about someone's work, as long as it's not ultimately too negative, which is what we're going to go into in a second. Here's something that comes up so much for all of us. People saying, I don't think I'm qualified enough to review someone else. It's something we hear all the time, to which we say, yes, you are. You are qualified. A lot of the time, this feels like an excuse to get out of doing reviews, but as staff, we're never going to say, okay, never mind, don't do the review. And why? Because that's unfair, both on the person who wrote the piece and you, because you are undermining your own skills. If you allow yourself to believe that you don't have what it takes to produce a review, then you're never going to be able to provide helpful feedback, because you're not going to be practicing, you know? The question to ask yourself is, who is going to read that book if and when it comes out? It's going to be readers, right? And you are a reader. If you're not a reader, you must be a reader, because you're a writer. And if you are a writer, something must have inspired you to start writing. If you're not a reader, then why are you writing? It's pretty much impossible to write without reading other texts for things like inspiration, ideas, stylistic influences, and looking into your own genre. That last one is more of a sort of marketing thing, a thing that will get you further into the publishing industry and stuff like that. So no worries if that's a bit blowing our minds right now. But still very relevant. All of them are very relevant. And I think as well, you've got to think about the things that, as a reader, you have certain things that you will like or dislike. Some of them will be personal preferences, but some of them are going to be things that are the general consensus of what unites all readers. So things like not being confused when reading. If it's an incoherent text, you're probably going to not like it very much because you don't understand it. You want to be able to understand what's going on in the story, and you need to be able to feel that the words encapsulate what is trying to be said. So, what you ultimately need to do when you're doing reviews is make sure that this is the case. Maybe you don't read that genre, but you know how to read things that are understandable. So, as far as you can go, you can make sure it's understandable. You can make sure that you like what's being said. Make sure that you like the tension in it. Make sure you like the flow. And that's what we're about to go into as well. Something else you may have noticed, just to say, is that if you do get stuck, we have a stickied message in the feedback channels. So it has been beautifully stickied for us by Coffee. It is just a review being simply a list of what you liked, of course, as I said. What would be more successful potentially in your opinion, making sure you understand what's going on, as I said, whether there's a flow to the narrative, that can be a poem or it can be a story, and whether you would read more. So even though you potentially might not read more, you should really say why, because oftentimes I wouldn't read more of a fantasy story purely because I don't like fantasy. But that's my personal preference. If I did like fantasy and I wouldn't read more, then there's probably going to be a reason for that that's specific to that text. So I would need to specify that. So make sure that you're saying why. And then, of course, anything else that the writer has specified. So this is really important in the writing circle. A lot of the time, writers will say, how is my writing on this topic? And then, of course, most people, they do answer that question, but sometimes things do get very occasionally skipped over. So make sure you're answering those questions as well. And it's not also just, I liked it. You got to say why you liked it, why it's so good. Or if you didn't like it, say why you didn't like it. But make sure that you're also giving solutions to those issues. I think it's probably time to talk about types of critics at the writer's block. We have a couple of different types, so you don't need to be a harsh critic to be a critic. All critics are different, which is why we have on the server 3 different types. We have the gentle critic, who is the type of critic who will give you probably lots of positive feedback if you feel like your confidence is going to be knocked quite easily. We also have the Goldilocks critic, which is the one that we get the most questions about. So I'm going to answer it now. Goldilocks, as I'm sure you know, is the girl who entered the house of the three bears. The porridge of one bear was too hot, one too cold, but one was just right. Of course, that's Baby Bear. We can think of the harsh critic as porridge, that is maybe too hot, and the gentle being too cold. The middle ground is just right, so that would be our Goldilocks critic. When you submit your work for feedback, though, make sure you only ping one of these roles, just one, because we don't want to spam loads of people, but we just need to make sure that your work is exposed to the right people. So criticism doesn't always mean, though, that it has to be actual criticism. It doesn't have to be negative feedback in the most literal sense of the word, because in literature, as I'm sure you know, there are multiple literary critics on the scene. You might have, for example, as well seen the word film critic thrown around. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative review. It can be positive as well. Film critic is much more popular in everyday conversation, which is why I'm using that as an example. But it can often mean there is positive in there too, which is something that we really, really recommend, because tearing down someone's work is not a good idea. It will often just make them upset and unmotivated, and that is something we don't want in our server. We are a community of writers who love writing, and we want to support each other as best we can, which is exactly why you need to do a mix of the two, even if you're a harsh critic, because otherwise, again, it's just not fair. I saw this picture online, and I thought it was fantastic, and it's so apt for what this slide is. I think it's also not really a good idea to use negative language, as this can have the same effect on someone, making them upset and unmotivated. If someone said to you that something you've done is bad, but you spent a long time working on it, you probably wouldn't feel that great about it. So I think what is better to do is really acknowledge the time spent on it. We can say it could use some tweaks. You could say that I would like it more if, and then give your suggestion. But this also means that your review of other people's work must be constructive. So, constructive just means that something is intended to have a useful or beneficial purpose. And that means you must be giving ways to improve something if you don't think it's the most successful it can be. Because if you're just tearing down parts of texts and people's writing without really giving a solution, it's not an acceptable review, because you aren't really saying what's wrong with it and what you think would improve it. You're just saying, oh, it's bad, which is not what we're aiming for. That's my lot for today. I know that we've had questions about this, but this has been how to give feedback at the writer's block. And if you have any questions, you can always ping us as staff members in the server.